It started with a laugh, hers, sharp and unfamiliar, echoing through the kitchen late at night. Emily wasn't alone. At least not emotionally. That laugh wasn't for me. I just walked in from the garage, my hands still dirty from replacing a taillight on her car. A simple thing she'd casually mentioned 2 weeks ago. Something she needed done because driving around with a busted light could get her pulled over. Practical, distant, like everything about her lately. I didn't question why I was doing it at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, but there I was, doing my part for someone who no longer seemed interested in me at all. When I stepped into the house, I saw her standing by the kitchen counter, her phone pressed to her ear. Her back was to me, but the way she leaned against the counter, her hair cascading over her shoulder like she was posing for someone unseen. It hit me like a gut punch. I stood still, watching her, not wanting to interrupt. I shouldn't have heard anything, but I did. "Stop," she said, her voice playful but lower than usual. "You can't say stuff like that. You'll get me in trouble." Then she laughed again. Light, flirty, completely alien. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to rip through my chest. There was no mistaking the tone of her voice. It wasn't the way you talk to a friend or even a colleague. It was intimate. Her fingers danced over the rim of her wine glass, spinning it idly as she listened to whoever was on the other end. She giggled again. Emily doesn't giggle. She never has. Not for me, not for anyone. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Standing there like she was alone in the house. Like I didn't exist. I clenched my fists, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. But the next thing I heard tore through whatever composure I thought I had. "Of course I miss you. God, you have no idea how much." The taillight forgotten, I slammed the toolbox onto the counter by the door, the sound loud enough to make her spin around. Her eyes widened as she met my gaze, the phone slipping slightly in her hand before she quickly brought it back to her ear. I have to go," she stammered, her face paling. "Yeah, I'll call you tomorrow." The phone call ended, but the silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, neither of us said a word. She just stared at me, like a deer caught in headlights, while I stared back, barely recognizing the woman in front of me. "You gonna tell me who that was?" I asked, my voice calm, but barely. Emily shook her head, her lips twitching like she couldn't decide whether to lie or laugh it off. "It's not what you think, Will. Seriously, you're overreacting." "Am I?" I stepped closer, my voice dropping. "Because it sure sounded like you were talking to someone who knows you better than I do." Her mouth opened, then closed, as if she hadn't prepared an excuse for this moment. "It's just a friend," she said finally, crossing her arms. Defensive, too quick to dismiss. "A coworker. We were talking about the project. Does your coworker miss you?" I interrupted, my voice sharp now, the words cutting through her sentence like a knife. Her face flushed. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped, trying to push past me toward the sink. I blocked her path. "Ridiculous? You're laughing with some guy on the phone, telling him you miss him, and I'm being ridiculous." My voice was rising now, but I didn't care. I wanted the truth. I needed it. "You don't get it?" she shot back, her eyes narrowing. "You've been so checked out lately, Will. It's like you don't even care anymore. You're always at work, always busy. When was the last time you even looked at me like I was your wife?" The audacity of her words hit me like a slap. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "Don't you dare put this on me." She tried to brush past me again, but I caught her arm. Not hard, just enough to stop her. "Let go of me," she hissed, yanking free. Her eyes burned with anger now, her calm facade crumbling. "You're suffocating me, Will. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't need someone else to make me feel alive." And just like that, she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, my hands shaking, my mind racing. This wasn't an argument. This wasn't just a fight. This was something bigger. And as much as I hated to admit it, the person I thought I married was already gone. That I didn't follow her. Couldn't. My legs refused to move, and my mind was too busy replaying her words like a broken record. Someone else to make me feel alive. I stood in the kitchen for what felt like hours. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of the clock ticking above the sink. My hands were still trembling, and I realized I was gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles had turned white. I needed to think. I needed clarity. Most of all, I needed to know the truth. My eyes fell on the corner of the table where I'd left the envelope, my anniversary letter. 10 pages of memories, love, and promises. A decade of my life, poured into words, waiting for her to read. I'd been saving it for our anniversary dinner this weekend. Now, the thought of handing it to her felt like a sick joke. But something inside me snapped. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was desperation. Whatever it was, it propelled me forward. I grabbed the envelope, stalked upstairs, and stopped in front of our bedroom door. It was closed, locked. "Emily?" I called out, my voice flat. "Open the door." No response. I knocked harder this time. "I'm not doing this through a door. Open it." Finally, I heard movement on the other side. The door cracked open just enough for her to glare at me through the gap. "What do you want, Will?" "I'm tired." I held up the envelope. "Here. Happy anniversary." Her eyes flicked to the letter, then back to me. Her expression was unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might say something. Apologize. Explain. Instead, she sighed and opened the door just enough to snatch the envelope from my hand. "What is this?" she asked, her voice laced with irritation. "Something I wrote for you. For us." My voice cracked despite my best effort to sound composed. She stared at it like it was a chore she didn't have time for. "Will, can this wait? I'm not in the mood for one of your sentimental speeches right now." Her words hit harder than they should have. I nodded slowly, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from saying something I'd regret. "Read it," I said simply, then turned and walked away. I didn't stop until I was back downstairs. I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and headed out the front door. The air was cold, biting, but it was better than being inside that house. Better than being near her. I didn't have a destination. I just drove. The streets were quiet, the glow of streetlights blurring as I sped past. My mind was a mess of emotions. Rage, heartbreak, confusion. How had we gotten here? How had she turned into this person I didn't recognize? It was around midnight when I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. I needed coffee, something to ground me, so I walked in, found a booth in the corner, and ordered a black coffee I didn't intend to drink. My phone buzzed on the table, and I glanced at it. A text from Emily. "I read it." That was all she said. Just 3 words. I stared at the screen, waiting for more. An apology, an explanation, anything. But nothing came. After a few minutes, I typed back. And her response came almost immediately. "We'll talk tomorrow." I should have felt relieved. At least she was willing to talk. But the way she dismissed me earlier, the way she reduced a decade of our life to, "I'm tired," it didn't sit right. Something about her reaction wasn't just cold, it was calculated. It was like she was buying time. For what? I didn't know. I sat in that booth for hours, nursing a coffee that went cold long before I even touched it. By the time I got back home, the house was dark. I checked the bedroom. Her side of the bed was empty, the comforter pulled tight. She wasn't home, and I had no idea where she was. The emptiness of the house was suffocating. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, staring at the untouched bed. My heart was pounding in my chest as my mind raced through the possibilities. Where could she have gone? And why hadn't she told me? I checked my phone again. No messages. No calls. It was almost 3 a.m., and there wasn't a single trace of her. She hadn't even bothered to pretend. No excuse about staying with a friend or working late. She was just gone. My stomach churned as I thought back to the phone call I overheard earlier. That laugh. The way she said she missed him. Was she with him now? My hands clenched into fists at the thought. I needed answers. I dialed her number. It rang twice before going straight to voicemail. Typical. She always silenced her phone when she didn't want to deal with me. I tried again, and this time it didn't even ring. She'd turned her phone off. My frustration boiled over. I grabbed my keys and headed back to the car. If she wasn't going to come home, I was going to find her. I didn't have a plan, just a gut instinct that something wasn't right. I drove aimlessly at first, trying to think of where she might be. Her favorite coffee shop? Closed. The office? Dark. The idea of her being with him kept gnawing at me, but I had no idea who he was. My chest tightened as I realized how little I knew about her life these days. Then my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize lit up the screen. My pulse quickened as I answered. Hello. There was a pause. Then a man's voice, low and hesitant. Is this Will? The air seemed to leave the car all at once. Who is this? The voice cleared its throat. Look man, my name's Matt. I don't know how else to say this, but I think we need to talk. About Emily. Felt like the world shifted beneath me. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. What the hell are you talking about? She told me she was leaving you, Matt said, his voice a mix of guilt and defensiveness. She said your marriage was basically over, that you'd both checked out a long time ago. My heart dropped. Checked out? I spat. She told you that? She said you didn't care about her anymore? He continued, ignoring my tone. That you were just going through the motions. She made it sound like you were both miserable. I could barely breathe. The audacity of her lies was staggering. And you believed her? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Matt hesitated. Look, I don't know what to believe anymore. Okay? That's why I'm calling. She's been acting weird, disappearing for hours, not answering my calls. She's not even with me right now. I thought maybe she was with you. The realization hit me like a truck. This guy thought he was the other man, but he was just another pawn in Emily's game. She's not with me, I said coldly. And for the record, we were supposed to be celebrating our 10th anniversary this weekend. So whatever she told you, it's a lie. The line went silent for a moment. Anniversary, Matt muttered, sounding genuinely stunned. She said you guys were already separated, that you were just dragging it out for legal reasons. I laughed bitterly, though there was no humor in it. Separated? I wrote her a 10-page letter about our life together. I've been busting my ass to make this marriage work. Meanwhile, she's been running around behind my back, telling people I don't give a damn about her. What kind of person does that? Matt didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. I didn't know, man. I swear, I didn't know. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Where is she, Matt? You seem to know her better than I do these days. I don't know, he admitted. She was supposed to meet me tonight, but she never showed. I thought something might have happened. That's why I called. His concern sounded genuine, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I was too angry, too exhausted. If you hear from her, tell her to come home, I said, my voice hard. We're not done. I hung up before he could respond and tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear or confusion. It was rage. Emily wasn't just betraying me. She was spinning an entire web of lies, manipulating everyone around her to justify her actions. And now she was missing, leaving me to piece it all together like some kind of sick puzzle. I didn't know where she was, but one thing was clear. When she came home, there were going to be no more excuses. No more lies. This time, she was going to face me that I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I sat in the living room, the anniversary letter sitting on the coffee table like some cruel reminder of the life I thought we had. My mind wouldn't stop replaying the conversation with Matt, his voice circling in my head like a bad echo. She said your marriage was over. She made it sound like you were miserable. Every word felt like a fresh wound, deepening the anger that had been simmering since that phone call in the kitchen. I was done being blindsided, done being the fool in my own house. By the time the sun started to rise, I was still sitting there, my jaw tight and my fists clenched. Then I heard it, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. She was home. The front door opened slowly, creaking as she stepped inside. She must have seen me sitting there because her movements stilled. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Me from the couch, her standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure whether to bolt or come closer. Where were you? I asked, my voice calm, but the anger was evident in every syllable. She closed the door, her lips pressing into a thin line. I needed some air, she said, avoiding my gaze. Air? I repeated, letting the word hang in the air like smoke. All night. Her shoulders tensed. She dropped her purse onto the floor, leaning against the wall with a casualness that felt forced. I don't have to report to you every second of my life, Will. I'm allowed to have space. Space, I said, my voice harder now. Funny, that's exactly what Matt said you needed. Along with someone to make you feel alive. Her head snapped up at his name. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Panic. She quickly masked it, crossing her arms defensively. You talked to Matt? He called me, I said, leaning forward on the couch. I guess he's starting to figure out that you've been lying to him too. She opened her mouth to respond but then closed it, her jaw tightening. Her silence was louder than any excuse she could have come up with. Go on, I pressed. Tell me how he misunderstood everything. How you're just friends. Or maybe you'll say I'm imagining things again. Stop it, Will, she snapped, her voice sharp. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I stood up, my voice rising. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been feeding him the same bullshit you've been feeding me. Only difference is he's starting to figure you out. Meanwhile, I've been sitting here like an idiot trying to save a marriage you already gave up on. Her face hardened, and she stepped closer, her arms dropping to her sides. You don't get it, do you? She said, her voice low but laced with venom. You're so busy playing the victim, acting like I'm the only one who's wrong here. But you've been checked out for years, Will. Years. You don't see me anymore. You don't hear me. Oh, I hear you. I shot back. I heard you loud and clear last night, laughing on the phone, telling some guy you miss him. I hear you now, blaming me for your lies. You want to talk about being checked out? Take a good look at yourself, Emily. She flinched but recovered quickly, her expression shifting into something cold. You're pathetic, she said, her voice steady but dripping with disdain. Always so desperate to be the good guy. You think writing some stupid letter makes you a hero? Newsflash, Will, a letter isn't going to fix this. You can't fix something that's already broken. Her words hit like a slap, but I refused to back down. No, I said, stepping closer. You're right. I can't fix it. But I deserve the truth, Emily. I deserve to know who you really are. She glared at me, her chest rising and falling with quick breaths. For a moment, I thought she might crack, might finally tell me the truth. But instead, she laughed. A bitter, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. You want the truth? She said, her voice mocking. Fine. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of this house, this marriage, I don't need to explain myself to you anymore. You're not worth it. Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stood there, staring at the space where she'd just been, my mind spinning. Her words echoed in my head, but it wasn't just anger I felt anymore. It was something deeper, a realization. She wasn't just lying to me. She was tearing down everything we'd built, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. And the worst part? She didn't even care. I clenched my fists, taking a deep breath to steady myself. This wasn't over. Not yet. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the closed bedroom door. Her words burned in my mind like acid. I don't need to explain myself to you anymore. You're not worth it. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was fury. Fury at her lies, her coldness, her audacity to paint herself as the victim. I wasn't about to let her lock herself away and pretend this conversation was over. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed them, my chest tight and my fists clenched. When I reached the bedroom, I didn't knock. I pushed the door open hard enough to make it hit the wall. Emily jumped, startled. She was sitting on the bed, scrolling on her phone like none of this mattered. She looked up at me with a mix of irritation and defiance. What the hell are you doing? We're not done, I said firmly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind me. You don't get to just walk away from this. Her eyes narrowed. What do you want from me, Will? I already told you. I'm done explaining myself. You're just trying to drag this out because you can't handle the fact that it's over. Over, I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. No, what's over is your little charade. I'm done playing along, Emily. I want the truth, all of it, and I want it now. She scoffed, standing up and crossing her arms. You think you're owed something? After ignoring me for years? After putting your job and your ego above this marriage? Please. I took a step closer, my voice rising. Don't you dare twist this around on me. I've been here, Emily. I've been trying, even when you shut me out, even when you lied to my face. I deserve the truth, and you're going to give it to me. Her lips curled into a bitter smile. Fine, she said, her voice sharp. You want the truth? I'll give you the truth. I've been seeing someone for months, and you know what? I don't feel guilty about it. Not one bit. The words hit like a punch to the gut, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. Months? I said slowly, my voice trembling with controlled rage. So while I was writing you that letter, while I was planning to celebrate our 10 years together, you were what? Sneaking around behind my back? Laughing at me? She shrugged, her expression cold. Maybe. Or maybe I was just trying to survive in a marriage that suffocates me. I laughed bitterly, running a hand through my hair. Suffocates you? You mean the marriage where I've done everything to make you happy? The marriage where I've been the only one fighting to keep us together? Don't act like you're the victim here, Emily. You made this choice. You destroyed us. She stepped closer, her face inches from mine. No, Will. You destroyed us. You made me feel invisible. Unwanted. Do you even remember the last time you made me feel like I mattered? Her words stung, but I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative. You don't get to rewrite history, I said through gritted teeth. You don't get to justify betrayal because you were too selfish to talk to me, to fight for us. She smirked, shaking her head. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about betrayal. This is about me finally choosing myself. For once. The rage boiling inside me threatened to spill over. I took a step back, my chest heaving. Choosing yourself? I repeated, my voice dripping with disdain. You're a coward, Emily. You didn't choose yourself, you ran away. You lied. You betrayed the person who loved you more than anything, and you call that strength. Her smirk faltered, but she quickly masked it with defiance. Believe what you want. It doesn't matter anymore. I stared at her, my mind racing. This wasn't just about her affair. It was about everything she'd done to dismantle what we had. The lies, the manipulation, the complete lack of remorse. I turned toward the nightstand, grabbing her phone. She moved to stop me, but I held it up, my voice steady and cold. If you won't tell me the whole truth, maybe your texts will. Don't you dare, she hissed, lunging for the phone. But I was quicker. I stepped back, unlocking the screen with the passcode I'd seen her use 100 times. Her face paled as I scrolled through her messages. And there it was, thread after thread of texts to Matt. Messages to another name I didn't recognize. Flirty, explicit, brazen. My hands shook as I read the words she'd written, the pictures she'd sent. You didn't just betray me with Matt, I said, my voice shaking. There's someone else, isn't there? How many, Emily? How many lies have you told? How many people have you let into our life? Her face twisted with fury, but she didn't deny it. She didn't have to. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. I threw the phone onto the bed, the rage bubbling over. You're unbelievable. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. She crossed her arms, her eyes glinting with defiance. And what are you going to do about it, Will? Cry? Write me another letter. For a moment, the room was silent, the tension so thick it felt like it would crush us both. Then I turned and walked out of the room, her laughter trailing behind me like a knife in my back. This wasn't just a betrayal anymore. This was war. I slammed the door to the bedroom behind me, the sound echoing through the house. My chest was heaving, my mind racing with everything I just uncovered. This wasn't a misunderstanding, a moment of weakness, or even one affair. Emily's betrayal was systematic, planned. I stormed back down to the living room, pacing like a caged animal. My thoughts kept circling the same question. How long had I been this blind? Her phone, her damn phone, the things I saw on that screen. They weren't just texts. They were full-blown confessions of her double life. Flirty exchanges with Matt, pictures sent to someone named Ben. That made my stomach turn. And worst of all, a message to someone saved as unknown number. I can't wait for you to make me feel alive again tonight. Will is so predictable. I can't even stand being in the same room as him anymore. Alive again. That phrase. She'd used it before. Suddenly, I felt cold all over. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the audacity. The way she used my name like I was a nuisance. Like the 10 years we'd spent together had been nothing more than background noise to her. The front door creaked open, and I whipped my head around. Emily was standing there, arms crossed, her face a mix of irritation and smugness. "You stormed off like a child," she said, shutting the door behind her. "What now? Are you going to pout all night?" I stepped forward, pointing at her. "Stop. Just stop." My voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "No more games. No more lies. I know everything, Emily." Her eyes narrowed, but I saw the flicker of fear behind them. "You're being dramatic," she said, her tone mocking. I held up my phone, scrolling to the screenshot I'd taken before leaving her device behind. "Really? Then maybe you can explain this." I turned the screen toward her. For a split second, her face went blank. Then she laughed short, sharp, and entirely fake. "Are you serious? You went through my phone? That's pathetic, Will. You've officially crossed the line." "I crossed the line?" I took another step closer, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me for God knows how long. Cheating. Sneaking around. And you have the nerve to call me pathetic." She rolled her eyes, walking past me like I wasn't even there. "I don't have to justify anything to you. This marriage was over a long time ago. I was just waiting for you to figure it out." Her calmness, her indifference. It was infuriating. "Then why didn't you say something? Why didn't you end it before dragging me through the mud? Why not have the decency to be honest?" She turned back to me, her expression cold. "Because you wouldn't have let go. You'd have clung to this marriage like it was some sacred thing. Like we hadn't already lost everything that mattered." Her words were venomous, each one hitting me harder than the last. "So instead, you lied to my face. You humiliated me. You let me believe we could fix this while you were out with how many, Emily? How many people?" She smirked, crossing her arms. "Does it matter?" I froze. Her words were like a slap, so callous, so devoid of any remorse. "Of course it matters," I said, my voice low and trembling. "It matters because I gave you everything, and you threw it away like it was nothing." For a moment, she didn't respond. She just stared at me, her face unreadable. Then she sighed, brushing past me toward the couch. "You're exhausting," she said, sitting down and grabbing the remote. "Can we just skip to the part where you move out? Or do you need to cry about it some more?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. I stared at her, sitting there so casually, like she hadn't just destroyed everything we'd built, like she wasn't responsible for ripping my heart out and stomping on it. It wasn't just betrayal. It was cruelty. "Unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head. "You're not even sorry." She glanced at me, her expression bored. "Why should I be? You're just mad because you finally realized I don't need you anymore." That was it. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not my love for her, that was already shattered. It was the illusion I'd been clinging to, the hope that maybe there was something left to salvage. There wasn't. "You're right," I said, my voice steady now. "You don't need me. But you know what, Emily? I don't need you either." She raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Congratulations. You finally figured it out." I turned, walking toward the stairs. "I'm done, Emily. This is it. You want out? Fine. But when I leave, don't think for a second that I'll look back. You don't deserve it." She didn't respond, but I didn't care anymore. As I climbed the stairs, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm wasn't over, not yet, but I'd made up my mind. This wasn't going to end on her terms. The first thing I did when I got to the bedroom was pull out a suitcase. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming my sanity. Emily might have torched everything we built, but I wasn't going to let her trap me in the ashes. The zipper rasped against the quiet of the house as I opened the suitcase and began packing. My clothes, my watch, a few important documents. I wasn't thinking about where I'd go. I just knew I couldn't stay here. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. She was coming upstairs. The door swung open, and there she was, leaning against the frame like she had all the power in the world. Her arms were crossed. Her lips curled into that same condescending smirk that had become her trademark. "So that's it?" she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "You're just going to leave?" I didn't stop packing. You wanted space. I'm giving it to you. She scoffed, stepping into the room. Don't act like this is some noble gesture, Will. You're running away because you can't handle the truth. Because you finally realized you're not the hero of this story. I zipped the suitcase shut and turned to face her. Hero? Emily, this isn't a story. This is real life. A life I spent 10 years building with you, only to find out it was all a lie. Oh, please, she said, rolling her eyes. You're so dramatic. Do you even hear yourself? People fall out of love all the time. It's not my fault you're too stubborn to see it. Falling out of love? I laughed bitterly. You didn't just fall out of love, Emily. You fell into someone else's bed. Repeatedly. Her smirk faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. And what were you doing all that time, Will? Working late? Ignoring me? Acting like I was just part of the furniture? You're no saint. You just liked pretending to be one. Don't you dare, I said, stepping closer. Don't you dare compare what I did to what you've done. I worked late to provide for us. I trusted you to have my back. Instead, you stabbed me in it. Her eyes glinted with something I couldn't quite place. Anger, maybe, or satisfaction. Fine. You want me to say it? I'll say it. I cheated, Will. I lied. And you know what? I'd do it again. The words hit like a wrecking ball. I took a step back, shaking my head in disbelief. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why would you do this? Why would you destroy everything we had? Her face softened, but not with regret. It was pity. Because I was tired of pretending, she said simply. Tired of pretending that this life, this marriage, was enough for me. I wanted more, Will. And you were never enough. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her, trying to process what she'd said. Then something shifted inside me, a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in months. You know what, Emily? I said, my voice calm. You're right. I was never enough for you. But that's not my fault. That's yours. You're the one who chose to lie, to cheat, to destroy everything we had. And someday you're going to regret it. Not because of me, but because of the person you've become. She rolled her eyes, turning away. Spare me the lecture, Will. Just go. Pack your things and go. I picked up my suitcase, walking past her without another word. As I reached the door, she called out after me. And don't expect me to wait around either. I've got my own life now. I paused, glancing back at her. Good. I wouldn't want you to. I left the bedroom, the suitcase dragging behind me. As I reached the front door, I stopped, looking around the house one last time. The photos on the walls, the furniture we'd picked out together. It all felt meaningless now. This wasn't my home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. I walked out into the dawn, the cold air biting at my skin. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of freedom. Emily had burned the bridge, but I was the one walking away. And I wasn't looking back. The morning air felt sharp against my face as I stood by the car, my suitcase leaning against the curb. I didn't drive off immediately. Instead, I leaned against the hood, staring at the house, the place I had spent a decade building a life I thought was real. It wasn't grief that kept me there. It wasn't longing either. It was anger, mixed with the kind of clarity that only comes when the dust begins to settle. Emily thought she'd won. She thought I was just going to leave quietly, let her rewrite the story as if I'd been the villain all along. She was wrong. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of screenshots I'd taken the night before. Her messages to Matt, the flirty ones to Ben, and, most damning of all, the ones to unknown number. My heart still burned as I read her words, but now I wasn't just hurt. I was focused. I tapped the number she'd been messaging under unknown and hit call. It rang twice before a man's voice answered. Hello. For a moment, I didn't speak, letting the silence stretch just enough to unsettle him. This is Will, I finally said. Emily's husband. Or maybe you already knew that. The pause on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, his voice came back. Lie to me if it makes you feel better. I've got all the receipts. I could hear his breathing quicken, the sound of him shifting uncomfortably. Look, man, I didn't know she was still with you. Okay? She said. Let me guess. I interrupted, my tone sharp. She said the marriage was over. She said I was cold and distant, that I didn't appreciate her. Sound about right. The man didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. Let me save you some trouble, I continued. Everything she told you? It's a lie. I was there, doing everything I could to make this marriage work, while she was out building her fantasy life with people like you. Look, I'm sorry, okay? The man finally said, his voice defensive. I didn't mean to get in the middle of anything. I thought she was… You thought wrong, I snapped. And now you're going to do me a favor. You're going to tell me everything. When you met her, what she said, every detail. Because if you don't, I'm walking into my lawyer's office with this phone, and I'm going to make sure you're a part of this mess whether you like it or not. The threat landed. I could hear it in his exhale, the way his tone shifted from defensive to resigned. Fine, he muttered. We met a few months ago at some networking event. She said she was single. I didn't think to question it. She didn't act like someone who was married. Details, I demanded. He hesitated but continued. We started talking. She was charming, confident. Said her husband was emotionally checked out, that she was stuck in some dead-end marriage. I believed her. Okay? She didn't even wear a ring half the time. My jaw clenched. She'd taken it off. Deliberately. And the rest. Depressed. How long has this been going on? Couple of months, he admitted. We met up a few times. I didn't know about the others, if that's what you're asking. She never mentioned them. She barely even mentioned you. Of course she didn't. I let out a bitter laugh. And where were you last night? She wasn't home, and it sure as hell wasn't with me. The man hesitated again. We were supposed to meet up, he said quietly. But she canceled at the last minute. Said something came up. I haven't heard from her since. So she wasn't with him either. The mystery of her absence last night deepened, but I wasn't about to let him off the hook. I hope you understand what you've gotten yourself into, I said, my voice icy. Emily's not some damsel in distress. She's a liar, a manipulator, and now you're part of her mess. The man didn't respond. He didn't need to. I hung up, my hand shaking as I shoved the phone back into my pocket. I looked back at the house one last time. The curtains were drawn, the windows dark. She was still inside, probably sitting on the couch with that same smug look on her face, thinking she'd won. But the truth was coming. She thought I was leaving quietly. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't leaving at all. Not until I burned her web of lies to the ground. It was time to turn the tables. By the time I walked back into the house, my heart was pounding, but not with anger anymore. It was something sharper, colder. A determination that felt foreign but also liberating. Emily had controlled the narrative for far too long, and it was time to take it back. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. The sight of her there, so calm and detached, sent a fresh wave of anger through me, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't the moment for rage. Back already? She said without looking up, her voice dripping with boredom. Thought you'd be halfway to your mom's by now. I stepped into the room, my suitcase still in hand. Changed my mind, I said, dropping it by the stairs. She finally glanced up, her brow furrowing. What are you doing? I took a deep breath, crossing my arms as I stood in front of her. We're going to have a conversation, a real one. And this time, you're not walking away until I get answers. She let out a short laugh, tossing her phone onto the coffee table. Oh, come on, Will. What's left to talk about? You're just dragging this out because you can't handle the fact that it's over. I ignored her condescension, pulling my phone out of my pocket and holding it up. I just got off the phone with unknown number. You know, the guy you told you couldn't wait to feel alive with again. Her face went pale for just a fraction of a second before she masked it with a sneer. You're stalking me now? That's a new low, even for you. Stop deflecting. I snapped, my voice hard. He told me everything. The lies, the excuses, the way you made me out to be some cold, unfeeling husband. And guess what? He's not the only one, is he? Her eyes darted to the side, her fingers twitching in her lap. She was calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew. How many, Emily? I demanded, stepping closer. How many people have you dragged into this mess? Matt? Ben? The guy with no name? Who else? She stood up abruptly, her arms crossed as she stared me down. What do you want me to say, Will? That I made mistakes? Fine. I did. But you're not exactly innocent here. You think you're the perfect husband, but you're not. You're... Don't, I said, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to spin this. This isn't about me. It's about you. You lied. You cheated. And you didn't even have the decency to feel guilty about it. She rolled her eyes, her bravado faltering. Guilt? You want me to feel guilty? For what? For finally putting myself first? For doing what makes me happy? Happy? I laughed bitterly. Is that what this is? Happiness? Because from where I'm standing, it looks more like destruction. You didn't just cheat, Emily. You torched everything we had, everything we built together, and for what? A few cheap thrills? Some fleeting attention? Her face hardened, but she didn't respond. For the first time, she looked unsure. I took another step closer, my voice lowering. You thought I'd just leave quietly, didn't you? That I'd slink off, lick my wounds, and let you rewrite the story. But I'm not going anywhere. Not until everyone. Matt, Ben, your nameless boyfriend, knows exactly who you are. Her mask cracked, and for a moment, I saw fear in her eyes. You wouldn't, she said, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Try me, I said, pulling my phone out again. I've got everything I need right here. The texts, the calls, the pictures. You think they'll want to stick around when they find out they weren't the only ones? When they realize you played them just as much as you played me? You're insane, she hissed, stepping back. No, I said, my voice cold. I'm done being insane. I'm done letting you walk all over me while pretending to be the victim. This ends now. She stood there, staring at me, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. For the first time, she didn't have a snappy comeback. No sarcastic remark. No smug smile. Just silence. I held her gaze for a long moment, then slipped my phone back into my pocket. Here's how this is going to work, I said. I'll give you one chance to come clean, to tell the truth. Not just to me, but to everyone you've dragged into this mess. If you don't, I'll do it for you. Her lips parted like she was about to argue, but I raised a hand, cutting her off. Think about it, I said, turning toward the stairs. You've got until tomorrow. After that, you don't get a choice. I didn't wait for her response. I walked upstairs, closing the door to the guest room behind me. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had the upper hand. Emily had built her world on lies, and now it was about to come crashing down. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. No sound of Emily moving around. No clinking dishes. No muffled music from her phone. The silence felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. I hadn't slept much. I lay awake in the guest room, replaying the events of the last day in my head. The confrontation, the phone call, her stunned silence when I gave her the ultimatum. It all lingered, like a film I couldn't stop watching. When I finally came downstairs, she was sitting at the dining table, a cup of coffee in her hands. She didn't look up when I entered, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was waiting for me to speak. Have you made your decision? I asked, standing at the edge of the room. She set the cup down carefully, her fingers lingering on the rim. What do you want me to say, Will? That I'm sorry? That I regret everything? Because I'm not sure I do. Her voice was quieter than usual, less defensive, but it didn't soften the blow of her words. I don't need an apology, I said. I need the truth. She looked up at me then, her eyes tired, but still defiant. You want the truth? Fine. I don't love you anymore, Will. I haven't for a long time. I stayed because it was easier, because you were safe. But I felt trapped, smothered. I let her words hang in the air, weighing them carefully. So you decided to lie, to cheat, instead of just telling me the truth and letting me go. Her jaw tightened. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I shot back, stepping closer. You could have ended this with some dignity. Instead, you dragged me through hell because you didn't have the guts to face the consequences. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. And what about you, Will? You're not perfect. You put your work above everything else. You stopped seeing me as a person, as someone with needs. You… Stop, I said, my voice sharp. We're not doing this again. This isn't about my flaws. This is about what you did. Own it. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, she looked away, her lips pressing into a thin line. Fine. I lied. I cheated. And I hurt you. Is that what you want to hear? No, I said quietly. What I want is to understand how someone I loved, someone I trusted, could do this. But I guess I'll never get that, will I? Her eyes flicked back to me, and for the first time, I saw something that looked like guilt. I don't have an answer for you, she said softly. Maybe I'm just selfish. Maybe I didn't know how to handle feeling like I was fading away. I nodded slowly, the anger in my chest starting to dissipate, replaced by a deep, hollow ache. Thank you for finally being honest, I said. But that doesn't change what happens next. She frowned, her arms uncrossing. What do you mean? I pulled my phone out of my pocket, opening the folder with all the screenshots. I placed it on the table in front of her. These are going to Matt, Ben, and everyone else you've lied to. I've already emailed my lawyer. We're done, Emily. Her face went pale, her breath hitching. Will wait? No, I said firmly, cutting her off. You don't get to wait anymore. You don't get more time to manipulate and twist things. You wanted out, Emily. Now you're out. Her eyes darted to the phone, then back to me. You don't have to do this, she said, her voice trembling. We can figure something out. We can part amicably. I laughed bitterly. Amicably? After everything you've done? No, Emily. You don't get to walk away clean. Actions have consequences, and it's time you face them. For the first time, she looked truly afraid. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for the phone, but I grabbed it before she could. I'm not going to destroy you, I said, my voice steady. But I'm not protecting you either. Everyone deserves to know the truth, just like I did. She opened her mouth to argue, but I turned and walked away before she could speak. The door slammed shut behind me as I left the house for the last time. This time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt free. The past 10 years of my life were over, reduced to ashes by her lies. But standing there, staring at the horizon, I realized something. Ashes make for fertile soil, and now it was time to start over.